If the Spirit lives in you, the first change is almost never loud, but it is deep. It doesn't arrive as excitement, intense emotion, or immediate certainty. It begins in silence, reshaping the way you perceive, respond, and deal with what happens within you. Many fail to recognize it because they are waiting for something more visible. This video speaks exactly about that first inner shift. What happens before behaviors change, before circumstances transform, before answers arrive. Understanding this prevents confusion, spiritual frustration, and the feeling that nothing is happening, when in fact something essential has already begun. Have you noticed yourself becoming more aware of your own reactions, more sensitive to thoughts, words, or attitudes that once felt normal? Have you wondered whether this quiet change is a sign of growth or weakness? Stay with me until the end, because what you'll understand here can bring clarity, inner rest, and direction for the season you're living in. Many people enter a spiritual process expecting clear, fast, and visible signs of change. Something that can be identified effortlessly, confirmed by others, or immediately noticed in behavior. When that doesn't happen, a quiet frustration begins to grow. The feeling that maybe nothing is really changing, or that God hasn't started working yet. That expectation is understandable because we are used to measuring progress by what can be seen. In everyday life, almost everything is evaluated by external results. The problem is that God's way of working does not follow this pattern. He does not begin where most people instinctively look. Scripture expresses this clearly when it says, "Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." This verse is often remembered as part of David's story, but it reveals something much deeper. It describes the consistent way God works. He begins his work in the most invisible and most decisive place of human life. When God begins with the heart, it is natural that for a while, almost nothing seems different on the outside. The routine continues, the challenges remain, reactions are not fully aligned yet, and this can create confusion, because we are waiting for an external sign to confirm a change that is still happening internally. Many interpret this moment as delay, or even as God's absence. But in reality, it is exactly the opposite. It is a sign that God is working at a deeper level than behavior. He is dealing with motivations, perceptions, and inner structures that will later sustain everything that becomes visible. A common mistake is born here. When someone measures the work of the Spirit only by what can be demonstrated externally, a silent pressure emerges. The pressure to look transformed. The person tries to adjust attitudes before the interior has been reorganized. That does not produce maturity. It produces exhaustion. God does not demand fruit before tending the root. He does not begin by asking for visible change when the interior is still misaligned. The Spirit does not work from the outside in. He establishes government within before any consistent external expression appears. That is why, in the beginning, transformation is usually discreet. Not because it is small, but because it is structural. Structural changes are rarely loud. They happen quietly, repositioning what sustains future decisions, reactions, and choices. This is exactly the point where many people give up. Not because God is not working, but because they are looking in the wrong place. They are waiting for external evidence to validate a process that is still forming in the invisible. And by doing so, they ignore the very first real movements of God's work. The biblical pattern confirms this repeatedly. Before changing paths, God adjusts understanding. Before transforming actions, He works on awareness. Before correcting behavior, He repositions the heart. The beginning is never performative, it is formative. When this is understood, something important happens. Anxiety for signs decreases. Comparison with other people's spiritual experiences loses its power. The need to prove something to yourself or to others begins to dissolve. Space opens up to trust the process. Perhaps you interpreted the external silence as stagnation. Perhaps you assumed nothing was happening because nothing had appeared yet. But what seems like absence may actually be preparation. What seems like delay may be foundation being adjusted. God does not begin with what appears. He begins with what sustains everything. And when God begins within, a new question naturally emerges. If he does not start with appearance, then where does the first real sign of inner change actually show up? Many people expect the first sign of the Spirit's work to be immediate behavioral change. More willpower, more consistency, more emotional control. When that doesn't happen, the feeling arises that something is missing. But God's work rarely begins with action. It begins with the way you perceive what is happening inside you. Scripture describes this process by saying, "Be transformed by the renewing of your mind." Renewal does not point to a single event, but to a continuous movement. The mind begins to be reorganized, not to accumulate more knowledge, but to gain clarity over what once operated on autopilot. Thoughts that once appeared without resistance begin to be noticed. Impulses that used to guide decisions are now observed more carefully. Emotions that once dominated the moment are perceived before they turn into action. There may still be no clear external change, but a new awareness has begun to operate. This awakening is often misunderstood. Many assume that noticing more inner conflict means they are spiritually worse. In reality, perception does not create the conflict. It only reveals what was always there, but previously unseen. What changes is not the internal content, but the light that now illuminates it. Before the Spirit's work, much of life was lived without reflection, automatic reactions, impulsive words, repeated choices. Not because of lack of character, but because of lack of awareness. When the Spirit begins to act, he first illuminates understanding, not behavior. That is why the initial feeling is rarely euphoria. It is clarity. You begin to notice what you think, what you feel, and why you react the way you do. This can feel uncomfortable, but it is not a sign of regression. It is a sign that alignment is beginning to form. There is a mistaken expectation that spiritual maturity means the absence of inner tension. But maturity actually begins when you recognize the tension, when you notice misaligned thoughts before acting on them, when you identify impulses that once guided your decisions without being questioned. This awareness brings a new kind of inner responsibility, not in the sense of pressure, but of conscious choice. Not every thought must be followed. Not every emotion must be obeyed. Not every impulse must become action. This distinction is born from perception, not from effort. At this stage, many try to accelerate the process. They want to jump from awareness straight into perfect action. They try to correct themselves quickly without respecting the time needed for inner reorganization. But perception is not a temporary stage to be discarded. It is a foundation to be strengthened. A renewed mind begins to function like a filter. What once passed in and out without resistance now goes through discernment. This does not eliminate conflict immediately, but it changes the way you relate to it. The Spirit begins to govern through understanding. You may still not see clear changes on the outside. You may still struggle with old patterns, but the fact that you now perceive what once went unnoticed is already a decisive sign that something new is happening within you. Perception, however, does not come alone. As light increases, it also creates emotional impact. What was once ignored now carries weight. What once felt neutral now draws attention. And this is the point where many people become confused about what they are feeling. When inner awareness increases, something almost inevitable happens. A subtle discomfort appears. It isn't obvious fear nor a clear accusation, but an inner uneasiness that's hard to explain. Things that once felt normal no longer go unnoticed. Thoughts, words, actions, and even intentions begin to carry a new weight. This discomfort is often misunderstood. Many people quickly conclude that they are failing spiritually. They assume that if they were truly right with God, they wouldn't feel this weight. But that interpretation misses something essential. This discomfort is not born from guilt. It is born from light. Jesus explained that when the Spirit of truth would come, he would bring conviction. Conviction is not condemnation. It is not a voice that accuses, threatens, or shames. It is an inner clarity that reveals what was previously hidden. The Spirit does not expose in order to wound, but in order to realign. Religious guilt pushes a person away. It produces fear, rigidity, and paralysis. Spiritual conviction does the opposite. It draws closer, awakens awareness, and creates space for adjustment. The discomfort that comes from conviction does not destroy faith. It organizes it. Before this, many attitudes were lived without any inner weight, not because they were aligned, but because there wasn't enough sensitivity to notice them. Now, with more light, what once seemed neutral begins to feel uneasy. Not because God changed his standard, but because your perception has been refined. This is a delicate stage. If someone doesn't understand what is happening, they may try to silence the discomfort. They may confuse it with excessive pressure, or even long for the earlier state when everything felt simpler. But that doesn't bring peace. It only interrupts the process. Healthy discomfort does not demand immediate correction or instant perfection. It simply signals direction. It shows where something is out of alignment without pressuring for quick results. The Spirit does not work through oppression. He leads with clarity and patience. Many confuse sensitivity with spiritual weakness. They believe that feeling more means being weaker. Spiritually, the opposite is true. Sensitivity is a sign of life. Where there is no life, there is no sensitivity. What is dead does not respond to light. What is alive does. This inner uneasiness is not the end of the process, nor a sign of regression. It is a means. It prepares the ground for more conscious choices, more aligned reactions, and less impulsive decisions. It is not meant to produce guilt, but to open space for real transformation. When this is understood, the relationship with discomfort changes. Instead of running from it or trying to cancel it out, a person begins to listen to it, not as an accusation, but as evidence that the Spirit is active, adjusting what once went unnoticed. You may have wondered whether this inner weight is a sign of spiritual weakness, but often it is a sign of growth. The light has increased. And when light increases, awareness increases as well. Discomfort is simply the natural response to this new level of clarity. If this content is helping you better understand what is happening inside you, consider subscribing to the channel. That way, you can continue following reflections that bring clarity, inner rest, and direction for deep, silent spiritual processes like this. This discomfort, however, does not remain only as a feeling. When the light continues, it produces something deeper than uneasiness. It creates inner tension. And it is from this tension that the conflict so many people misunderstand is born. When the light remains and awareness stays active, discomfort stops being just a passing sensation and begins to turn into inner conflict. Not an external, visible, or declared conflict, but a quiet tension that happens within. Opposing desires, different impulses, wills that no longer move in the same direction as before. This conflict often creates confusion. Many people believe that if the Spirit were truly present, there would no longer be any inner struggle. They associate spiritual maturity with the absence of tension, as if peace meant never facing inner opposition. But this expectation does not match how spiritual life is described in Scripture or lived in reality. The Bible addresses this clearly by stating that the flesh fights against the Spirit and the Spirit against the flesh. This is not a warning of failure, but an honest description of how transformation unfolds. Where the Spirit begins to govern, resistance appears. Where there is no conflict, there is usually no government, only unchecked impulse. Before this, many decisions were made without any inner opposition. Desire arose and was followed. Impulse appeared and became action. There was no pause, no questioning, no reflection. The absence of conflict was not maturity, but a lack of spiritual awareness. When the Spirit comes to dwell and exercise governance, something changes deeply. Impulses still arise, but they no longer rule alone. Between desire and action, a space appears, an inner pause, a tension that did not exist before. That space is not weakness. It is the beginning of inner authority. This conflict does not mean the flesh has won. On the contrary, it indicates that it has lost absolute control. The struggle exists only because two forces are now at work. Where there is only one, there is no tension. Where there are two, confrontation emerges. Conflict is evidence that something new has entered the scene. Many interpret this struggle as spiritual regression. They think that because misaligned desires are still present, something must be wrong. But conflict does not point to the Spirit's absence. It points to His active presence. The Spirit does not instantly remove the old nature. He confronts it, restrains it, and gradually weakens it. This process requires learning. The Spirit does not work by removing conflict immediately, but by teaching you how to discern it, to identify the source of impulses, to recognize that not everything that arises within you defines who you are. This discernment is one of the marks of maturing faith. At this stage, a quiet temptation appears to give up on the process, not to abandon faith, but to surrender to the exhaustion of inner struggle. A person grows tired of the tension, of the need to choose consciously, of constant inner vigilance. But it is precisely here that spiritual life is being established. The conflict did not come to destroy your faith. It came to strengthen it. It develops discernment, trains inner self-control, and matures the ability to respond rather than simply react. It teaches you not to be governed only by what you feel, but by what you now understand. Over time, something begins to change. The conflict does not disappear all at once, but your relationship with it shifts. The Spirit does not merely resist the impulse, He begins to shape the way you respond to it. The impulse still arises, but it no longer determines the outcome. This is a quiet but powerful sign of spiritual growth. It is not the absence of struggle, but a change of position within the struggle. You are no longer fully submitted to what you feel. A new center of governance is now operating. And from this point on, transformation starts to become practically noticeable, not necessarily in major decisions, but in everyday reactions, in the way you respond even before you act. This is where change begins to appear. After awareness expands and inner conflict becomes part of the experience, something begins to change, almost imperceptibly. These are not yet major decisions or obvious external transformations. The change appears first in your reactions, in what happens before action, before words, before the automatic response that once surfaced without restraint. Scripture describes this process when it speaks about the fruit of the Spirit. Fruit does not appear all at once, and it is not produced by direct effort. It grows from the inside out, progressively and naturally. That is why the first sign is rarely a completely different life, but inner responses that are no longer the same as before. Situations that once triggered explosive reactions now create pause. Words that once came out without reflection now meet resistance. Emotions that once took full control are now perceived before they turn into reactions. The external circumstance may be exactly the same, but the point of response begins to shift. This change often goes unnoticed because it happens at a subtle level. Those observing from the outside may not see anything different, but the one living it inside does. And that matters. Reactions reveal who governs the interior. When the Spirit begins to govern, he does not immediately change the scenario. He changes the place from which you respond to the scenario. Many people undervalue this stage because it is not impressive. There is no clear turning point, no intense feeling of victory, no external confirmation. Yet this is precisely where transformation begins to take practical shape. It is the moment when the inner life slowly begins to touch the outer life. The self-control mentioned in Scripture does not arise as rigidity or forced restraint. It is born out of sensitivity to notice an impulse before obeying it. Gentleness does not come from the absence of emotion, but from the ability to not react from it. These are quiet changes, yet deeply structural. At this stage, it is common to feel that it is still not enough, that the transformation should be greater, more visible, more consistent. And indeed, there is still a long way to go. But the mistake is to despise what has already begun. The Spirit does not produce mature fruit before strengthening the root. He begins by adjusting inner responses before consolidating outward behaviors. Another common confusion is expecting that if the Spirit is working, inadequate reactions will disappear entirely. But the process does not work that way. Transformation does not eliminate failure immediately. It changes direction. What was once automatic is now perceived. What was once repeated is now questioned. That is already real change. This new way of responding creates a different kind of freedom. Not the freedom of never failing, but the freedom of no longer being fully governed by impulse. A space opens between stimulus and response, a space where choice begins to exist. Over time, these small changes accumulate. A pause here, a different response there, a more aligned reaction in another moment. Individually, none of this seems remarkable, but together, these changes form a new way of living, more conscious and more stable. This is how the Spirit transforms. Not by beginning with what impresses, but with what sustains. Not by demanding spiritual performance, but by shaping inner responses that are more aligned. And when reactions change, even slowly, everything else begins to follow. This quiet process prepares the ground for something even deeper. As reactions become more aligned, an inner certainty begins to emerge, not based on emotion or performance, but on stability. A confirmation that does not need to be proven, only lived. After reactions begin to align and the inner life gains greater coherence, something new starts to form within. It is not excitement, not intense sensation, not a certainty that arrives as emotional impact. It is something more stable, quieter, an inner confirmation that does not depend on how you feel on any particular day. Scripture describes this by saying that the Spirit Himself bears witness with our spirit. This testimony does not occur in the realm of emotional excitement or momentary enthusiasm. It takes place in the realm of deep awareness. It is a calm conviction of belonging, direction, and support, even when external circumstances have not yet changed. Many people expect spiritual confirmation to come as a powerful, unforgettable moment filled with emotion. When that does not happen, they conclude that they have not heard God or that they have received nothing. But the Spirit rarely confirms through impact. He confirms through permanence. This confirmation shows itself as inner stability. Even on confusing days, something remains firm. Even when doubts arise, something does not break. Even when emotions fluctuate, there is an inner axis that does not collapse. This is not the absence of questions. It is the presence of support. Before, faith could depend heavily on emotional state. A good day strengthened it. A difficult day weakened it. Now something begins to reorganize. Faith starts to rest less on momentary feelings and more on a sustaining conviction. The Spirit does not remove human fluctuations, but He prevents them from defining the inner direction. This inner witness does not shout. It does not draw attention to itself. It does not attempt to prove anything. It simply remains. It is a constant presence that sustains the journey in silence, especially when there are no clear answers, external signs, or visible confirmations. That is why many people fail to recognize this confirmation when it appears. They are waiting for something more intense, more obvious, more emotional, but the Spirit is not seeking to impress. He is seeking to sustain. He does not confirm to excite, but to keep the heart steady over time. This inner stability becomes even more essential during seasons of waiting. When nothing seems to move externally, it is this quiet confirmation that keeps the heart from giving up. It keeps faith alive without depending on constant stimulation or immediate proof. At this point in the process, something becomes established. A person may not be able to explain everything that is happening or put it into clear words, but inwardly they know they are no longer where they once were. There is a calm assurance that God is present, active and faithful, even without full clarity about what comes next. This confirmation does not end the spiritual process. It sustains it. It does not announce the completion of the work, but guarantees that it will continue. It is the Spirit affirming internally what has not yet become visible externally, preparing the heart to trust even in silence. When this conviction settles in, rest begins to appear in a new way. Not because everything is resolved, but because there is now enough trust to keep walking without constant anxiety. Urgency diminishes. Inner pressure loses its grip. The heart finds stability. And it is from this place of rest that something essential becomes clear. If this quiet and steady confirmation exists, then the work is not merely beginning, it is already underway, being faithfully, consistently, and purposefully cared for by God. After everything described so far, there is a point that often goes unnoticed when we talk about spiritual life. When the Spirit begins to work deeply, He does not create a constant need for novelty. He creates stability. The clearest sign of maturity is not spiritual intensity, but conscious perseverance over time. Many people associate growth with striking moments, something strong, obvious, emotionally elevated. A specific day that can be remembered as proof of progress. But faith that matures is not sustained by peaks. It is sustained by continuity. To remain is not to stand still. It is to stay aligned even when there are no visible stimuli or rapid changes. Jesus expresses this when He says that those who remain in His word are truly His disciples. Remaining in this sense is not rigid effort or forced discipline. It is an inner posture. It is staying attentive, sensitive, and present even when the process unfolds in silence. One of the greatest spiritual confusions is interpreting silence as stagnation. When there is no new sensation and no immediate response, many assume something has stalled. But the Spirit does not always work through outward movement. Often He deepens roots before allowing any visible expansion. This stage requires maturity because it requires trust. It is easy to follow when everything makes sense, when there is clarity and enthusiasm. The challenge arises when there are no detailed explanations, and the process continues without apparent novelty. This is where the presence of the Spirit shows itself as support, not stimulation. Those who learn to remain are no longer driven by the need for constant confirmation. They do not need to prove to themselves or to others that they are changing. They feel no urgency to rush stages or compare their journey to someone else's. There is a quiet confidence that the process is underway, even without visible signs. This confidence does not come from emotion. It comes from inner alignment. The heart finds a steadier rhythm. Faith stops swinging so sharply with circumstances. Even when doubts arise or difficult days come, something remains firm within. Over time, remaining produces a deep transformation. A person stops living in pursuit of spiritual stimulation and learns to walk with consistency. Faith becomes less reactive and more rooted. There is less anxiety for answers and more trust in the process. This kind of maturity does not attract external attention, but it sustains the entire journey. It prevents quiet abandonment during long seasons. It keeps sensitivity alive without turning faith into burden or obligation. To remain is a sign that inner governance has already been established. Perhaps you are living exactly in this stage. There are no intense emotions, no major crises, no spectacular changes, but there is constancy, there is awareness, there is a quiet sense of continuity. This is not stagnation, it is maturity being formed. Conscious perseverance does not mean the absence of challenges. It means that even with challenges, you continue. You remain attentive, sensitive, and aligned, not because everything is resolved, but because there is now a foundation strong enough to sustain the path. If this kind of clarity has helped you remain with more security and less confusion, consider subscribing to the channel. That way, you can continue following reflections that do not rush processes, but help you walk with greater steadiness, understanding, and rest along the way. This perseverance prepares the heart for something essential. When you understand that you do not need to prove anything, chase signs, or compare yourself to others, space opens up to truly rest, to rest in the faithfulness of God, who sustains the process from beginning to end. Perhaps throughout this video, you have recognized something that had already been happening within you, but that you did not yet have clear words to describe. It was not a loud change. It did not draw attention from the outside. It was a quiet, almost discreet adjustment, yet deeply real. Something shifted in the way you perceive, respond, and position yourself inwardly toward life. Scripture says that the one who began a good work will bring it to completion. This promise was not made for spectacular moments or intense, fleeting experiences. It was made for faithful, continuous processes, often silent ones. God does not begin something only to abandon it halfway. When He begins, He sustains. When He touches the interior, He takes responsibility for the process. Many people expect the beginning of transformation to come with clear answers, intense emotions, or rapid and visible change. But as we have seen, the beginning almost never works that way. It starts in awareness, it starts in perception, it starts in inner governance. What is born in silence is not fragile, it is structural. And what is structural sustains everything that will come later. If today you notice your thoughts more clearly, feel more attentive to your reactions, or sense inner conflicts that did not exist before, this is not a sign of spiritual weakness. It is a sign of life. It is evidence that something has been awakened within you and is already in motion. Even if the outside has not yet changed, the center has been touched. The Spirit's confirmation does not come as pressure. It does not demand proof. It does not require spiritual performance. It sustains. It remains. It walks with you on clear days and confusing ones, quietly reminding you that God is present, even when there are no external signs to confirm it. Perhaps answers are still missing. Perhaps circumstances have not yet rearranged themselves. Perhaps the road ahead still feels unclear, but the most important thing has already happened. Inner governance has begun to realign. The way you see, feel, and respond is no longer the same. And that changes everything, even if it is not yet visible to others. There is a kind of rest that is born when you understand this. A rest that does not come because everything is resolved, but because you realize you are not standing still. The process is underway. God is already working at the deepest level, the level that sustains all other changes over time. This rest is not passivity. It is trust. It is not giving up. It is alignment. It is the awareness that you do not need to rush the process, compare yourself to others' journeys, or force results in order to feel spiritually secure. Now, all that remains is to recognize this quietly within yourself, without effort, without control. without the need to explain or justify, simply to notice. What has changed in you does not need to be announced or displayed. It only needs to be cared for with patience, faithfulness, and openness to what God continues to do. If this video has brought clarity, helped you name what was already happening, or offered rest in the middle of confusion and security in the silence, consider subscribing to the channel. Here, we walk together through reflections that do not rush processes, do not create guilt, and do not demand performance, but help you recognize with greater clarity and peace what God has already begun and will complete in His time.